Welcome to the ID Den podcast, the show for teachers ready to step outside the classroom and into their next chapter. I'm your host, Charity Bosch, and I know firsthand how overwhelming it can feel to leave teaching behind. Whether you're exploring instructional design, navigating corporate culture, or just figuring out your first steps, this show is your roadmap. Each episode will tackle the real challenges, share practical strategies, and prove that your teaching skills are exactly what the world needs, just in a different setting. Let's turn that classroom expertise into your career advantage. Today, I want to share my story of leaving the classroom, and we'll start by going over my teaching background. So I taught in the classroom for 7 years. When I first started teaching, it was about a year after I graduated from college, and I actually went to school down in California, and when it was time to get a job, there really weren't any. They were still pink slipping teachers at that point, and so I started looking into where I could easily transfer my credential, which states would take it, and Idaho happened to be one that was super easy to move to and get my credential transferred. So I started applying for jobs, and my husband and I actually moved up before I had secured a job. We got a little townhouse that we rented, and we made the move. And on the drive up, I got a call from a principal middle school that needed to hire a 6th grade science teacher. It was an overcrowd position, so it was already kind of towards the end of September when we moved, and it wouldn't start until kind of the beginning of October. And I wouldn't have my own classroom. I would be on basically like a projector cart, moving from classroom to classroom of other teachers who were on their prep at that point to teach from their classroom. I ended up getting that job, and it was part-time, so it wasn't completely full-time yet, but I taught my very first year from a cart teaching science. So sometimes I had 3 carts if it was an experiment day and moving classroom to classroom. And that's where I landed to begin with. And then after that year, they didn't need that position anymore, obviously. So I ended up getting a job as a 4th grade teacher at an elementary school. And I loved that job. I loved my team. And then a principal from another district reached out needing a 4th grade teacher at his school. And so the district was closer to my house. So I was like, well, that could be interesting and get different experience in a different district. So I moved to that role, and I taught that for 2 years, and it was terrible. It was a Title I school. We had a lot of students that were part of gang families, so the demographic was kind of rough, and just kind of overall wasn't a great experience. The state was launching a new standardized test, and the first year that I was at that school and district was kind of like the pilot/benchmark year. So our principal told us to purposefully not prepare the students, not put a whole lot of work and thought into it, so that we could shoot for a low benchmark and could only go up from there, which that's terrible. But, I was the 2nd year teacher, so I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to listen to my principal. And that's what I did. And scores were not great. Obviously, they wouldn't be. And the next year, I was pregnant with my first child for that, and they used the previous years, so the let's shoot low benchmark year, which weren't even my students at that point. They had moved on to 5th grade. They used those scores as part of our performance evaluations, and I had my kind of final observation right, I think it was like literally 2 weeks before I had my daughter, and I had to be induced with her. My blood pressure started getting out of control, and at that point I was, for that observation, sitting a lot, and I had even gone to my principal and assistant principal and said, hey, look, basically my doctor said, like, you sit down or you can't work. And they were like totally supportive and totally okay, and like, oh, obviously, yeah, I sit all the time. And that was a negative mark on my observation, was that I wasn't walking around and observing the students closely enough, and they happened to observe an intervention reading group where I had students from other classes. I think there was 35 or 36 students in my classroom. So I was sitting as I was instructed by my doctor and approved by my administration with way more students than I should have had in my classroom, and students that weren't even mine, and I got docked for that. So I was pretty hysterical when I went over my final performance review, especially because the 2 years prior, I had been like great. Like even as a beginning teacher, I was told like, wow, you're like, this is really great. These are good scores, blah, blah, whatever. And so to go from that to then this experience of using prior students and years test scores where we were told to shoot low, and then the observation, I just lost it. So I was like hysterical in the office. I was like yelling at my assistant principal, like, this is not the teacher that I am. This observation does not reflect who I am. You are observing me at a time in a pregnancy when like anyone would be sitting, and I was told to sit, and you told me it was okay to sit, and not even during like a core instruction. It was a reading intervention group. I had the highest level. So we had all of the high kids in the entire grade level in my classroom, and it just was really unfair. And that's kind of where I would say that's where I started to feel like, man, I don't know if I want to do this. Like, that's really not fair. So I ended up going on my maternity leave. While I was on my maternity leave, I took my baby to go visit the previous school that I had been teaching 4th grade at. Loved the principal there, loved the team, wanted to show, off my baby to everyone. And while I was there, it was just like, oh man, I wish I had never left. Like, I regret ever taking that position. So I started talking to my husband about it and was like, I can't stay in this district. I can't stay in this school. Like, they're not being fair to the teachers by measuring us against things that were from previous years. And we were instructed to not even put effort into it. And now all of a sudden my performance is being docked because of it. I'm either leaving teaching, or if I can get a job at this other school again, I will go back to that school and teach there. So I did. I ended up messaging the principal and was like, oh my gosh, like I loved being there. I really missed the environment. I really missed the team, the school, and not just a grade level team. Like I liked a lot of the other teachers at different grade levels. Do you have any positions that are coming up? And she was like, yes, we have a 3rd grade one that I think you'd be perfect for. I want you to come interview with the team. So I interviewed, and they did end up picking me, thankfully. And so I spent the last 3 years of teaching in 3rd grade with that team that I just absolutely adored. Loved them. But at that point, kind of everything had started with that experience. I was over parent nonsense. I was over that last year at the other district that I taught 4th grade. When I was pregnant, I had a desk thrower. I vividly remember there was one point, probably it was 7 or 8 months along, where he put his hands on the desk and stood up like he was getting ready to launch it. And I thought for a moment, like, oh my God, I have to choose between protecting myself and my unborn child and the rest of my class. And thankfully I was able to de-escalate him, but I marched myself right down to the principal's office and I said, you get him out of my classroom. No one should have to be in the position of choosing that. And you're not putting my long-term sub through that with this student. Like, you get him out. And my principal was like, you're absolutely right. Like, we have to be thinking about your safety as well. And we'll get him moved to another classroom. And like that afternoon, like he was moved out of my classroom. I didn't see him again, obviously, like in the hallways and things like that. But like he was not in my classroom anymore from that point on. And so just, certain things kind of started bubbling up. Had my first child, definitely enjoyed being now at the other school again with a better team, a better principal. Back to my typical 3 and 4 out of 4 performance observations, things like that. But that kind of sowed the seed, that experience of like, I don't know if I want to do this job anymore. I don't know if I'm meant for the classroom. And in hindsight, moving grade levels, moving districts didn't fix anything. It was more like a Band-Aid. And I stayed for longer than I should have. That last year of teaching, I happened to also be pregnant with my second child. So that didn't really help the situation, but was definitely like over it for that last year of teaching. I didn't like the job anymore. I didn't want to be there. I would cry every Sunday. I would cry every morning because I didn't want to go. And I just wish that I could have left sooner. So that's kind of a little bit about my background, the grades and subjects that I taught. I tend to talk about my experience with what's the opposite of rose-colored glasses. Like, it wasn't great, but there were things that I did love about teaching. I did have a lot of students that I really enjoyed, really loved, really cared for. I did like most aspects of the job. Obviously, like some of the parent issues, student behavior issues, the politics of it all, I don't agree with standardized testing, especially when it's used to group students, when it's used to evaluate teachers on their abilities. It's a 1 point in time test. That's not fair. There's a lot of things that I disagree with, and I think the system is really broken, but there were things that, I look back on very fondly. I did love particularly my third grade team that I ended teaching with. I still stay in contact with a lot of them. I went to one of their retirement parties just like a month ago, but the pros for me did not outweigh the cons. So I would say that moment with the observation when I was pregnant was my breaking point. That's when I realized, I don't want to do this. I don't agree with this. I don't want to stay in this. But at that point, I also went through a lot of okay, if I don't get this job, this third grade job at this other school, I'm going to quit. I'm not going to do teaching anymore. But then it was really scary because I was I don't know what to do. And then I had a lot of guilt because I had spent all this money on an undergraduate degree that, at least from my perspective at that point, could only be used for teaching. So it was well, what am I supposed to do? I spent all this money on this degree. There's nothing else for me to do with it. I don't even know what I would do. Do I go work at Target? I just had a lot of fear about what could be next, a lot of just not knowing what to do. So I kind of I got that third grade job and I was oh, okay, I'm good now. I'll be fine. And that first year was pretty decent. I had a good class, obviously loved that team. But again, the seed had been sown. I was 1/2 of a foot out the door already, and it was only going to grow from there. And I look back on it now, and I wouldn't say I regret staying those 3 more years, but I do regret not getting out within those first 2 years. I do kind of regret staying that third year just because I was done. I was over it. And I also feel bad for my family. I was pregnant with my second. I had a toddler, and I just, by the end of the day, was so burnt out from teaching that I just didn't have the energy to give to my family. And it just wasn't a great experience for anyone at the time. And so I do wish that I had kind of moved on before that last year. Instructional design, how did I get there? So I started thinking about, probably after that first year, back in the old school, teaching third grade with this new team. That's when I was kind of you know what? I still don't think I'm supposed to be in the classroom. Moving districts and grades did not really do anything there. And so I started, after kind of overcoming a lot of that guilt and that fear, thinking okay, well, what can I do with this degree that I personally won't feel like I've wasted something, and that I can use the skills that I have from teaching. And that's kind of where instructional design came about. So I did get my master's in curriculum and instruction. I wish that I hadn't. I don't feel, especially now doing the job and having been a hiring manager, I don't feel that you need to get a master's degree, especially as a teacher, to go into instructional design. You can get a certificate or go through another program that maybe isn't through an accredited university, just to learn some of the specifics to instructional design. But I don't think that you need to spend the time and money to get an entire degree unless that's what you really wanted to. At the time, I didn't know of any sort of programs or things like that to get more of a certificate through. In hindsight, if I had known about those, I would have gone that route instead. But I didn't. I got a master's degree in curriculum and instruction, and the master's degree was very theoretical. I mean, it was a master's of science, so I did do a research project as kind of my capstone. That was a lot. I wrote a very lengthy paper, all of those things, but it was very theoretical. So it was learning about the models. It was learning about, I would say that it was more appropriate for higher education roles where you're going to be doing more research projects and things like that. I don't think a degree in curriculum and instruction is required for a corporate role. It's just not. You don't need that much. And so I did go through that, and I actually didn't finish the program, graduate from it. I finished my capstone while I was still teaching, but I didn't actually get my degree and go through the graduation ceremony until after I had moved on from the classroom to my first instructional design job. And that was kind of a big shift. So that first instructional design job that I had was at a utility trade school in my area. And I found out about the job through the PE teacher at my school, his wife worked there. And that's kind of how I learned about it. Was he told me like, oh, hey, I know you want to leave the classroom. My wife's work is looking for someone to come in this capacity. And so I ended up connecting with his wife on LinkedIn, and had some conversations about what the role would look like. I was like, help me get the job, basically. And so she kind of, did some things to help in that arena. But ultimately, I applied for the job. I interviewed for the job. That particular company does a working interview. So they actually pay you. So I went in for 3 days. I got paid to kind of do the job. So they had me work on a program that they were actually trying to work on and had me do a facet. And that was my first moment where I was like, oh my gosh, my master's prepared me for nothing. And I really had to lean heavily on the team and the people that they had put me in touch with. Like the very first day, they were like, oh, so-and-so is going to be your SME. And I remember once I got my laptop and sat down, I had to Google SME. I didn't even know what that was, which, by the way, if you don't, that is a subject matter expert. That's someone who is the expert of the subject matter. So the content that you're creating training around, you're the training expert. They're the topic. You can think of it, topic expert. And I didn't even know what a SME was. So it was very eye-opening to be like, oh gosh, maybe I don't know what I'm doing. But, between Google, there was no Chat GPT at that time. Between Google and the people that they had put me in touch with, I was able to complete the assignment successfully, gave a presentation on it, and I was actually told that I was being passed over for someone else at that point. And so I was really bummed. I was like, oh, dang. I was still in the classroom at that point. That interview was in March. And I think it was 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from the HR department there, which I thought was I was like, oh, that's interesting. And they were like, hey, the other person actually turned down the role and we would like to offer it to you. So I was like, sign me up. However, it's March. I still have 2.5 months of school left. And I really don't want to break my contract. And I was very lucky because they were like, oh, no problem. We'll wait for you, basically. But that did put a little bit of pressure on me I literally stopped teaching on a Friday and started at that job that next Monday. I wish that I would have taken a couple weeks off in between, but I didn't. Again, lesson learned, hindsight. And so I got that job and I started in June, and continuing in on the job, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know anything about instructional design. I just spent 2 years in a program and spent all this money, and I feel like I'm not prepared at all to actually do the job. So again, Google was my best friend, and I kind of just self-taught. I read books, I read blogs, I watched training videos and things that were available and easy to find online, and I kind of just figured out what I was doing. I was flying by the seat of my pants for sure. However, I did really well figuring out what I was doing on my own, and I ended up being promoted into the instructional design lead at that company before I ended up leaving to my next position, which I'll get into. And, there was so much, aside from feeling like I didn't know what I was doing and trying to have to wing it and things in that role, there were so many good things that it was a breath of fresh air. And I really felt like I made the right decision. This is where I'm supposed to be. And, some of that was obviously the pay. I went from making 40 something a year to making 65 a year. So it was $20,000 a year more right off the bat, which was huge for my family and the goals that we had. And felt like I was okay, I'm being paid my worth now. And then when I got that bump, I got a little increase before I got that promotion. But then when I got that promotion, I was making around 77,000. So within a year and a half from leaving the classroom, I was making $30,000 more a year than I had been. The benefits were great. The health insurance was great. The other perks that that company offered were really great. And so I just felt like at the end of the day, I would leave, and I would leave my work at work. Whatever didn't get done was moved to the next day anyways. It wasn't like, crap, I didn't get through that lesson. Gonna have to shift things, and there's not enough time in the school year to cover everything anyway. So now what? And, have papers to grade, all the things that teachers bring home, and continue to do work that they're not being paid for, working all sorts of crazy overtime if you were to put it into corporate terms. And it wasn't like that. I could get off work, come home, and I was just a mom and a wife, and I could just enjoy my time with my kids without worrying about the stack of papers that were sitting in my bag to be graded. And it was just a breath of fresh air. And I know a lot of people will be like, well, what about your breaks and summers off? Like, didn't you miss having the entire summer off? I didn't. Honestly, I thought I was going to. I thought it was going to be really weird to like go from the classroom straight into this new job, and I wasn't going to enjoy that at all, and I was going to miss that summer, and I didn't, because I wasn't exhausted. I didn't spend the first month of summer break trying to recoup from the school year. Like, I was able to transition nicely into this job and feel like I could breathe again, and I didn't miss it. There was one moment where I think Thanksgiving, it was like, oh, I don't get the whole week off, where it was like, oh, that's kind of a bummer. But I could have taken PTO. Like, I could have still done that. But overall, I really, truly didn't miss those things. It was more just the culture shock of transitioning to corporate environment. But there was so much where it was like, oh, like, this is kind of nice. I don't mind this, actually. And so that's kind of a bit about that first role. And then I was poached from that job by the COO of the next company that I worked at. He reached out to me on LinkedIn and was like, hey, this was after COVID. So when COVID hit at that utility trade school, I was part of a team that had to rapidly deploy online learning in a capacity. And so we were tasked with figuring out, like, how are we going to take this program that is fully hands-on in person, and whatever we can, make it available online so that we can reduce, people on campus, on-site class sizes, things like that, and give them knowledge at home online, and then just have basically the times that they come in be like, it's utility workers. They have to be able to climb a pole. You can't teach that online. Like, some of these things just can't be taught online. And through that, a couple colleagues and myself wrote a paper that was published in educational journal. And so that kind of caught the eye of this COO, was like, oh, hey, I see that you're a published author in this educational journal, and, looking at your work and stuff is really impressive. I'd like you to interview for this job. And so I interviewed for that job and I got it. And so basically it was a healthcare platelet collection startup. And they were like, you're our first hire in training and development, essentially. Like, we have this HR manager, but we need, to build out robust training, and we'd like you to come in and basically create the department. So you'd be coming in as the instructional designer with the intent to promote you to a manager, and you'll build out a team. And so I moved on to that role, and I loved that job. I had to process it with my therapist when that company went under, because I really, truly loved that job. I loved who I worked with. I loved the work that we were doing. It was super personally impactful to me because my son, and I won't get into it at all here, but ended up having some medical issues that were related to platelets. So it felt like, oh gosh, like, I can personally see the work that we're doing is important, and here's like just how important. Like, my son's life is the balance, and platelets are a big component. And so really loved that job. I did end up, before the first year was even up, I got the job in May. And then when I came back from my maternity leave from my third son, which I enjoyed a nice paid 9-week maternity leave compared to the 2/3 pay 6 weeks, I think is what I got with the districts for my other two. I came back and they promoted me to the instructional design manager, learning content manager, and I ended up hiring 2 more employees for my team. Unfortunately, as I've said, that company went under and I was let go. And that was really tough. It was really scary. I ended up starting to do some freelance instructional design, which kind of was the spark that led me to where I am now. And I ended up getting a full-time job again with an LMS company. And I worked at that job for, I think I started in March, and I ended up quitting in October because I wanted to do this full time. I wanted to have my own clients full time. I wanted to be my own boss. I got a taste of that when I had been let go and was freelancing, and just decided that that's kind of the route that I wanted to take my life. And so that's where I'm at now. I am the CEO of a instructional design firm that has clients. Really love the healthcare space. I've had some healthcare clients. I've had some retail clients. I've had some, actually, funny enough, teacher professional development clients. And so that's kind of my full-time gig, is doing that work. And then this is my passion project. And I am really passionate about helping others who are where I was, feeling burnt out and frustrated and wanting to leave the classroom, but wasn't sure where to go, become instructional designers. And that's kind of the side gig, if you want to look at it that way, that this podcast has been born from, and the Instructional Design Den overall was born from, and the program that I'm creating that will serve in place of a master's degree to help you know exactly how to be successful in an instructional design job. That first job that I had where I was like, I learned nothing in my master's program. That's not what I want for others. And so I'm building a program that is going to help you get into that first job and feel like, oh, I know what I'm doing and I know what all this is and I can succeed. I love the flexibility that I get, the time flexibility, the ability to show up for my 2 school-aged kids now, to pick up and drop off when necessary. My husband and I split that, but my younger little dude, he's still in daycare. Like, I just love being able to take them to their doctor's appointments and not have to worry about subplans or taking PTO, because I'm my own boss. It's my own time. I have my own setup. And, there are things I miss about teaching. I miss the team. I miss working with students, although I have subbed a couple times and I'm kind of like, I'm good. I feel like the behaviors with students have only gotten worse since I left, but I just feel like where I am now is where I'm supposed to be, and it's exciting and it's scary. Being an entrepreneur is hard, but in this case, the pros outweigh the cons so much that I would do it again in a heartbeat. So that's kind of my story. That's where I started to where I am now. I'm excited to share other people's stories. It won't always be instructional design. There are a lot of roles out there for teachers. Instructional design just translates really nicely and is where my area of expertise is. But I do want to bring other people onto this podcast who are doing something different and left the classroom and transitioned into a different role to hear their stories as well. So please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share this with your teacher friends that are also considering a change, or you think need to consider a change. Sometimes it takes someone else to be like, I think you're done. I think you need to figure out somewhere else to move on to. So if you know someone that you're like, ooh, I think this would be a good listen for them, please share it with them. And then feel free to connect with me on Instagram at the ID Den. Your story doesn't have to look like mine. It's not going to look like mine. Everyone's path is going to be different, but the goal is to be able to help you on your path succeed.